It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by Subhash Technosis. SubhashTechnosis.com. These are my friends in India. They can handle all of your outsourcing needs. If you need a website built, if you need search engine optimization, you need data entry, you need press releases, content writing, all different kinds of services for you. Anything you need outsourced. Subhash Technosis. You can find them on Facebook at Subhash Technosis LLC. If you want to get a copy of my book, you can go to emailrevealer.com. You get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. And don't forget OppermanReport.com, where you can go join our members section, exclusive content, additional content that you won't find on Friday nights or Saturday nights. We got a special show for you today. Okay, and I'm going to be honest with you. Today's a rough day. We got this crap going on in Charlotte, North Carolina, where they're showing this police shooting over and over. And it's a distressing day, right? And then we have our guest here, Philip A. Bassett, who wrote the book, Soldier of Truth, The Trial of Reverend Edward Pinkney. And I got to tell you, last night I was down at the Green Party booth in Pahrump. We were trying to register people to register to vote for the Green Party, and you know they're telling me, oh yeah, you got to be careful when you got to sign this here. You got to be careful. You don't talk people into signing. You don't do this. You don't do that. And once again, I had to say, yeah, you know, I got a friend who's sitting in prison right now, 67 years old, sitting in prison over some little nonsense recall petition. Some little dates were wrong on a petition, and they convicted him. They threw him in prison for 2 to 10 years. You know, and I don't know, maybe I'm a softie or whatever, but I can't help but forget this. I can't help but go on with my day when I think about these things and think about our friend, Reverend Pinkney, sitting there right now in prison. Right now, he can't go to the bathroom when he wants. He can't do what he wants. You know, all these things are suffering, indignities that go on for a man at 67 years old who spent his life serving for your benefit and for my benefit and for the benefit of the people in his neighborhood and the people he loves. And it's, on one hand, it's so discouraging, but on the other hand, we have to look at these people and say, look at them, look up to them, and look up to them with encouragement, and say that these are the people we have to mold our life after, and we cannot stop, we cannot give up 1 inch. And we have to keep resisting, and we have to keep supporting our fallen comrades that are in prison. What's his name? Leonard Peltier, who just had his son on last week, sitting in prison over 40 years, 71 years old, has diabetes, rotting away in a prison for totally trumped up charges. So, I don't know. We have with us today Philip A. Bassett. He wrote a book called Soldier of Truth. The Trials of Reverend Edward Pinkney. And we have Mr. Bassett with us today. Mr. Bassett, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much. Can you tell us about yourself? Who is Philip A. Bassett?
Well, I'm married. I'm happily married. I have 2 grown daughters, and my oldest daughter's married, and she has 3 girls of her own, so I'm a proud grandparent, too. I've always been an office worker or a painter, kind of a laborer, for a lot of my working life. And back around 2000, I decided to go back to school, get a teaching degree. And I think the things sometimes that happen while you're doing other things become really important, because I started working at a place called the Michigan News Agency in Kalamazoo, and that's the place I really credit with where I woke up. You know, there was so much information in that store, and I was exposed to so many different points of view, and I started reading up on all these different points of view, and I realized we're being lied to about a lot of things. another thing that happened at that job, working in the newsstand, was a lot of people would come in and complain about the local newspaper. And so I kind of started to get the idea to maybe make one of my own. It was a really ambitious enterprise. So started up an online newspaper. And the way I did it was I just put a sign up in a cafe. And before I knew it, I had 10 or 12 volunteers, Seemed like there was just a ton of people that wanted to get their thoughts out there, that thought that there wasn't a forum for their voice. And that's what we ended up calling it, was the Kalamazoo Voice. And this happened back in 2004 is when we started it. It never got real big, okay? It wasn't a big success at all. It's just that it taught me a lot of things. And one of the volunteers that we had there, his name was Kwame. I can't remember his real name, but he had a pen name, and it was Shorter. So he called himself Kwame Shorter. And he had heard about Reverend Pinkney. He knew about him previously. I had heard about something that he had done because several men had been jailed naked here in Kalamazoo, and they had been sprayed down with fire hoses. And one or two of them ended up getting a settlement. And I had heard about that, but I didn't know Reverend Pinkney was involved with that. So anyway, at one of our meetings one time, Kwame mentioned Reverend Pinkney. He had been kind of inquiring about him, and he saw an email, and somebody, it was a desperate email, and they were very worried for his life. And so about a month later, that was around 2005, we went and saw him speak in Battle Creek, at the Battle Creek Library. And that was my first introduction to Reverend Pinkney. And I've been following him for the last 10 years now, since that point.
I don't think I've ever heard that story. What happened? He was arrested naked? How'd that happen? Oh,
no. What happened was Reverend Pinkney helped out these young men that were jailed naked. And he encouraged one of them to sue and so on. And I think this is when he became kind of an enemy of the state, if you will. Because what I notice is that he's bad-mouthed in my town, real bad. And when I try to spread the word about him, it's like there's a stone wall up there of propaganda about him, and through the mainstream channels. And I think this is why he got on people's nerves right away, as a fighter of the status quo and government power. So that's what that was. He was not jailed naked or anything.
Okay. Now, when well, good, because sometimes we have him on the radio from jail. I'm glad.
I haven't heard that yet.
I'm glad he's not sitting there naked. Now, how did what does your book cover? His early life, his childhood. What does the book cover?
It starts with the first trial because this was my introduction to him. Basically, when we heard him speak at the library, by this time we had also gone on cable access and we learned how to use cameras. And so he asked us to film his trial, and we had to send in a permission slip, and they actually agreed to let us film his first trial. So that was in 2006. It was a 3-week affair, 2 weeks of trial, and the jury deliberated for 3.5 days. It's amazing. And that first trial ended in a hung jury. And so in the book, the way I do it is I kind of make the circle go, or the story go kind of in a circle. I start with the first trial, then get a little bit into his childhood, because I want to show, that he had a tremendous character right from the beginning. And then by the third chapter, it's when he gets in my town of Kalamazoo. And then at that point, he was put into prison for the first time. I believe he was framed for an insurance thing, supposedly not turning in a premium in a timely way. But the premium was only $123. So it's just kind of like all of his trials and all the accusations, they're all really ridiculous if you take the time to research them.
Well, you mentioned the first trial. What were the charges in the first trial?
Okay, now are you talking about the insurance thing or the one that I witnessed?
Well, the one you said was the first trial that you witnessed.
Okay, the first one I witnessed was a voter fraud trial.
Right.
And talk about ridiculous. What they were doing was they said he had touched an absentee ballot. And this is a 5-year felony in Michigan, unbeknownst to a lot of people. In fact, I did an informal survey, and more than half the people didn't know that it was a 5-year felony if you even just touch someone else's absentee ballot. And so we get there, and we have, our camera. We film the entire thing for all, at least the 2 weeks. We didn't, there's nothing to film with the jury deliberating, really. But for the 2 weeks, the first 2 days, what I witnessed was the prosecutor going over Reverend Pinkney's phone records, his cell phone records, with a fine-tooth comb. And he was making implications that Reverend Pinkney and the city clerk had somehow cooked something up. And it was just inference and innuendo. There was nothing, that he ever proved or really made a point with. Then he proceeded to spend probably another couple of days talking about applications for the absentee ballot, which doesn't, anybody can fill out your application. All you have to do is sign it. And they were going over differences in handwriting and differences in ink. It was all just, it was so much smoke and mirrors. And their star witness was, she had given a completely different testimony the year before at another civil trial. So I saw right away that the prosecution, they were, it was easy to see the deception, you know what I mean? And so this has kind of colored my attitude ever since.
Well, now,
I don't know if I answered enough.
No, yeah, sure. Now you said that the trial was because he had touched an absentee ballot. Now, who was this election for? Who was involved in the election? Okay.
Well, here they were recalling a commissioner named Glenn Yarborough.
Right.
And they kind of saw him as the heavy hitter on the commission, even though actually his brother Charles was also serving as mayor, but apparently Glenn was kind of more of the muscle. And they figured if they could oust him, then the other commissioners might kind of fall in line. So that was the plan, and it was a genius plan because what they did was they used absentee ballots as their strategy. And, because he was really trying to get people to go to the polls, he was trying to get them involved, and they realized absentee ballots would be a great strategy. And it ended up working. The recall was successful. And, recalls, sometimes they happen. I believe the election was in May, so these off-time elections, you don't get a big turnout.
Right.
And the turnout was only 650. There was 350 for the recall, to recall Glenn Yarborough, and only 300 against. So he was recalled, or at least the voters voted to recall him, but a judge reversed that within a week, and it was only based on 5 so-called tainted votes.
Now, that's a brilliant move. Okay, he comes up with this plan. I wonder how he came up with this strategy to recall to begin with, because no one really thinks of that. There's plenty of people here in Henderson, Las Vegas, Nevada area, that I would love to recall that are in office. So Reverend Pinkney comes up with this plan. I was going to call it a scheme, because he comes up with this plan to recall, and then he comes in an off-year election to use absentee ballots. Now, that's brilliant. That's brilliant strategy. Where does he come up with this idea?
I'm not sure, but he does have a history. He worked for Mayor Daley in Chicago.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was, the mayor it was at the end of his reign, and Reverend Pinkney wasn't a reverend at the time. He was just out of college. And apparently one of the mayor's aides had seen him had seen Reverend Pinkney on the basketball court when he was in high school. And they saw a leader, leadership qualities in him. And so the mayor kind of handpicked him for, just a young helper, kind of maybe a gopher type of guy. But I think he picked up a lot of his political know-how from that experience.
Well, that's brilliant.
And he's just a sharp guy. He's really he's intelligent. He's thinking all the time. He's a real people person. He knows, I think, how to get people motivated. And he knows a little bit, I guess, about pulling the strings of power, apparently.
Yeah, and he's always positive. He always has a positive attitude no matter how bad things are. And a lot of energy and a lot of faith, man. God bless him. Now you said the second part was you got into his childhood. So tell us about what created Reverend Pinkney in his childhood.
Well, I think that he had a strong and loving family. His family just seems to be really, really solid that way. And he told me they made a move when he was in high school to basically the white section of town, and that was kind of a seminal event in his life, I think. It helped him learn to be more diplomatic, maybe. I'm not as confident talking about his childhood just because it's just based on interviews that I had with him in summer of 2013. But it sounds like they were willing to fight, but they'd never posed a threat to the people in the neighborhood. And that's kind of how they learned to get along.
Gotcha. So now, when you were writing the book, what did you use as sources? Who did you speak to?
Well, a lot of it was my own experiences.
Okay.
And then other than that, I interviewed him. I didn't necessarily go to check on sources in Chicago just to check on his story, because I have a lot of faith in the Reverend, and I think when it comes to important things, he's not going to lie. Now, if somebody went to Chicago and said, no, he never did that, then I guess I'd be really surprised. I'm not necessarily an investigative reporter. This whole thing, I think my voice throughout it is just a regular guy who sees these things going on, sees the government acting in very shameful ways, and it just shocked me, I think if anybody witnessed the treatment that Reverend Pinkney has had at the hands of the courts, they would automatically vote for him, just because he's been given dirt so many times,
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
It seems like over and over he gets a raw deal in the courts. What was the next trial you started following with Reverend Pinkney? Because I know there was one too where he was arrested for quoting the Bible.
Right. Well, there was a second trial before that, okay? Because they failed to convict him in 2006. And they turned right back around in 2007 and got an all-white jury, and they ended up convicting him. He was convicted in 2007. And what they did was put him on a tether for a while. And I think this was kind of take the wind out of the opposition, because I think people would have been furious if he had gone to jail right away. So he was on a tether for about a year. And in that time, he wrote an article for the People's Tribune quoting Deuteronomy. I can't remember the numbers, but it was basically, in my words, God's going to get you, And the judge basically said, well, that's a threat on my life. And, they don't really believe that, but it was just an excuse. And so they sent him to prison that time for 3 to 10 years. Judge Wiley sentenced him to that for violating his probation. And that's when the ACLU got involved, helped him out, and I think he was out of prison about 8 months later. But that takes us That's the seventh chapter in the book. I talk about the second trial, and then the eighth is his time in prison. And there's an amazing story in there. The chapter's called "The Buck-Naked Fish," about how he organized, a very disparate group of 1,400 men from different races, and we hear about prison how they're divided so strictly, by race or different groupings, like the Aryan Nation, the Muslims, and so on. And he united all of these groups. There's 1,400. He had at least 1,100 people cooperating, and they did an action in the prison there, a food strike, and that turned out to be very successful. So successful, in fact, that they had to boot him out of there. And he ended up going on a merry-go-round of prisons, about 8 different prisons, or even more, in about an 8-month span. And then there's the last chapter of the text talks about his break with the NAACP, because there was quite a bit of dirty politics in that, too. And that was actually the end of the text in... the book was finished in 2013, the main text of it. And I was promised a publisher, and then they backed out. So I sat on it for 2 years, and then I decided to bring it out myself. And so I felt the need to write an afterword about a chapter length, about the length of one chapter, and just to bring people up to snuff on what's happened since then. And since then, basically, it was another trial having to do with elections, and they had tried another recall. They were going to recall the mayor this time. And before it even got to the recall, the government wasn't going to take any chances. They accused Reverend Pinkney of changing 5 dates on petitions. And if you've ever, I'm sure you passed out a petition.
Sure.
I have. And, people make little corrections, dot I's, and do all little things. And you see at the bottom of the form that any kind of alterations, anything you do, the maximum is like 90 days in jail and a $500 fine. And yet, these 5 dates turned into a charge of forgery against the Reverend, which I always equated forgery with signing someone's name to make a lot of money. That's the way I understand forgery, but apparently they see it differently. And this jury, again, it was 11 white people and a young Latina. And these people convicted him, and they actually listened to the prosecutor and the judge when they told him, there does not have to be any direct evidence that you can convict Reverend Pinkney just if you think he did it. If you have a strong feeling that he did it, you can convict him. And all those people listened to the judge and prosecutor, and that's why he's in prison right now.
You talk about how they stretch these forgery laws to charge them with forgery. They're doing the same thing with you see it constantly on TV commercials about identity theft. And now they create all these new laws to combat identity theft, and they get passed, right through the Congress immediately. And these draconian laws. And they expand it to cover like even writing a bad check, on your own account, can be, are swept under these laws, and people are just getting under the jack. But bad debts and all kinds of stuff with these identity, just like the same thing with these forgery laws that they pawned on Reverend Pinkney. So now with this latest charge, he wound up getting convicted, and I know just recently there was a chance for an appeal, and I believe the latest appeal failed. Are you up to speed on that?
I've heard that his appeal. Yeah. There's the appeal court, and then there's the Michigan Supreme Court, and both have denied his bond at this time. Really, really sad. We're unbelievable, kind of, that they're backing, these crazy decisions by Berrien County. But that's where it sits right now. So I believe that the next step is to take it to the United States Supreme Court. And I don't know if that'll be any different. I'm really starting to lose faith in the whole judicial system, you know, especially with this last trial. It just seems such a flagrant violation of just, you know, natural law, put it that way.
Yeah. Well, if people want to get updated on this, you go to bhbanco.org, and you can also donate to the Reverend there. And also, too, there's always a call for letters, you know, that you can just write the Reverend. You can send them a Christmas card. We have Christmas coming up. When you're in prison, the more letters you get, they see this. The COs see this. And the administration has their eyes all over this guy. You know, they forget it. They're watching everything that happens with him. So when they see this, he has people on the outside that are worried about him, concerned about him. He has visitors. These kinds of things are very, very important on how a prisoner gets treated. So you go to bhbanco.org. This is probably a good time to take a commercial break. We're here with Philip A. Bassett. The book is Soldier of Truth, The Trials of Reverend Edward Pinkney. Now, you can get that book at Amazon.com, or we'll have a link to the book, too, in the Opperman Report bookstore. So we'll be right back with more of Philip A. Bassett and the story of an American hero, Reverend Edward Pinkney, right after these messages here. Yes.
Hey.
And now a word from our sponsors. Did you know that 30% of all people on online dating websites and personal ads are either married or in a monogamous relationship? 30%. If you suspect that your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend may be cheating online, go to emailrevealer.com. On our online infidelity investigation. You give us their email address, and we can trace it back to online personal ads, dating sites, and social networks. We can even expand the investigation and find them cheating on escort service sites or even porn sites if they're registered to porn sites and swinger sites. So check out emailrevealer.com if you suspect your spouse is cheating, and check out our online infidelity investigation. William Ramsey is a producer here at the Opperman Report, and he's just come out with a new book, Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. Now, he just sent me a copy of this book. Oh, boy, it's about 2 inches thick, and there's a chapter on just about everybody in this book that you can imagine. The Beatles, and Jack Parsons, everybody's in here. It's incredible. And I definitely recommend this book. There's a bunch of pictures in here, too, of all these people and different chapters and information. Anton LaVey and people I've never heard of, too. There's a whole bunch in here. JFC Fuller. I don't know who he is. But it's great stuff by our producer here, William Ramsey. So check out Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. You can find it on Amazon.com, or you could find it in the Opperman Report.com bookstore. We have an urgent bulletin. It seems that the group Strawman is still on the loose. It has been confirmed that Strawman are Canadian, okay, and that authorities are asking people to stay indoors, lock your doors and windows until this group can be dealt with. You could find more information about this group of Canadians, at strawmanmusic.com. You can have your ad played here. Okay, we're looking for sponsors. Okay, in fact, we desperately need sponsors right now to take this show to the next level. So you can have your ad played here, read live, like I'm doing now, so artfully. Or we can even work up a little jingle for you with some music and stuff like that and play it here. You have no idea how inexpensive it would be to have your ad played on the Opperman Report on 7 stations live Friday night, and another 7 stations live on Saturday night, plus replayed every day of the week on different stations, and then archived on YouTube, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and all different kinds of podcasts, Pod This and Podbean, all different kinds of places who archive the show for us. And on those archives, your ad would play indefinitely, forever. You also get a little banner on OppermanReport.com. You get a mention on the air, you get a little interview on the air, and all kinds of fun stuff if you sponsor Opperman Report. We have an opportunity to get this show on a major AM/FM station in California. We've been approved. So if you want to sponsor us into that, so incredibly inexpensive that your ad would be heard by the range covers 5 million people in population where your ad would be broadcast, and all these other stations would be thrown in for free. So really affordable prices to sponsor OppermanReport.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You can get a copy of that book at emailrevealer.com, or you can get a copy of that book now. It's back up on Amazon.com. How to Become a Successful Private Investigator by Ed Opperman. And this book has been updated a little bit from the previous book that we had that was available to our wonderful listeners. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Now, we're here today with...
You still there?
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
We're here with Philip A. Bassett, Soldier of Truth, The Trials of Reverend Edward Pinkney. One more thing I wanted to bring up, too, is I was just talking about last night being gathering, registering people for Jill Stein for the Green Party. Jill Stein has come out in support of Reverend Pinkney, hasn't she?
Yes, she has.
Right. And so people want to keep that in mind, too.
She's been at a few events of his.
Oh, really?
She made I've seen her make a speech at the Occupied PGA. Not this past one, but I believe the one in 2014. So I have heard her speak, and I know she has attended events.
And one more thing, too. If people want updates and they want to write to Reverend Pinkney, they should go to bhbanco.org. So now, Mr. Bassett, can you tell us about, you mentioned one of the chapters in your book covered the fallout with the NAACP. Can you give us an idea of what went on there?
Well, I believe that the Whirlpool Corporation and the major money in Benton Harbor didn't like him being in that power position, because he was able to use the resources of the NAACP in some really good ways. He started, he's been doing something called court watching for years and years, and he started getting the NAACP involved in that. In fact, his first year, they got 7 awards from the NAACP for different things. One of them was for court watching, and other chapters supposedly were going to jump on the wagon and kind of copy them. But then he's such an independent spirit that I don't think that went along with their way of doing things. And they started to say that he wasn't even elected legally. There started some real shenanigans going on. And so he had to fight them not to have mid-year elections. He actually had to sue the NAACP to get them to stop doing these, trying to force through this election when he had already been elected president and served for 2 or 3 years. They were trying to say it never happened. And so he ended up having to sue them, and then eventually the fight wasn't worth it to him. And I believe what happened was Whirlpool offered anybody a membership in the NAACP if they would vote against Reverend Pinkney. And they badmouth him so bad that, they find people that'll do that for them.
Right.
So what he did at that point, when he saw it was a losing battle, he started talking about the NAACP and asking people to burn their cards because he feels that they're not relevant and they really aren't doing any good. In fact, they're blocking any real progress, in his opinion. So apparently 10,000 people or more have burned their cards, NAACP cards, in response to the Reverend's call, and he just sees them as ineffective and not relevant any longer.
And what exactly is the issues between Reverend Pinkney and Whirlpool? You always hear about Whirlpool coming up.
Well, the main thing that got him in trouble was standing up for Gene Clock Park, because that was bequeathed to the people of Benton Harbor forever. And what Whirlpool, and they have a development arm called Harbor Shores, and there's another one called Cornerstone Alliance. They get all these divisions. And they wanted to build a golf course, a Jack Nicklaus style golf course, and they needed this land from Gene Clock Park. Apparently they wanted some land along Lake Michigan for some, nice holes that way. So they basically maneuvered the land out from under the people of Benton Harbor and got the commissioners and so on to kind of sell the people out. And this was one of the things that Reverend Pinkney was, fighting. Of course, I think that he's had maybe a little chip on his shoulder ever since they put him in prison for the insurance thing. That's when he started court watching and protesting at the court. So I think when you do that, you make people mad right away. When you make people like judges and people like that who are supposed to be, good and pure authorities, if you make them look bad, then you're going to have repercussions, And I think he realizes that the power is the largest corporation in that area, which is Whirlpool. Maybe, they might be they're one of the largest in Michigan, maybe. I'm not quite sure about that.
And you're saying that Whirlpool had something to do with the insurance charges?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm sorry, okay. I'm not being clear about that. I just think that he, ever since that time, his relationship with the government, and I think the government and money, are intertwined. Right. And so he's had this antagonistic relationship with the government, with the courthouse, since around 2000, and I don't know about his insurance charge too much, other than he went to prison for it, and he says he was framed, and I believe him. But Whirlpool was involved in taking the land from the people of Benton Harbor for this golf course. And also they've taken Benton Harbor had to pay for all the infrastructure, like water and electric and all these things, but yet supposedly this land cedes over to St. Joseph in a number of years, and it's just I suppose it happens everywhere, but just wholesale ripping off of people that don't have the money to defend their position in court.
Yeah, it really is distressing. Now, one of the things, he's from the first time he came on the show, this is when he was out on bail, and he started talking about, the water, and the water doesn't taste good, and everybody knows something's wrong with the water. And I said, what's this guy talking about? He says, what is it? Okay. I says, how could there be something, I'm thinking in my head, I don't say it to him, but I'm thinking in my head, what could he be talking about? Obviously, this is a big city. They know what they're doing with the water supply. The water's not poisoned. What's he talking about? And it turns out he was 100% right in what was going on in Flint, Michigan with the water. Now, tell us about his background with all this business with the water.
Okay, now, you're talking about Flint, Michigan now.
Yeah, Flint, Michigan, but he was talking about Flint, Michigan, too.
Okay, yeah, it was terrible. Do you want to hear the story about Flint?
Sure.
Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, sure.
Well, what happened was the city manager, not the city manager, the emergency manager, who Reverend Pinkney has been fighting this concept ever since it came about. And so Benton Harbor and Flint are connected that way because they both had emergency managers.
Right.
What happened in Flint was they voted to save money. Everything's always about saving money with these emergency managers. They voted not to use the Detroit suppliers, who they had been using for years, and decided to go directly into the Flint River to get their water. Now, Flint, that's an industrial auto town, and the Flint River, if it looks anything like the Detroit River, where I'm from originally, that's some sick-looking stuff. And what happened was, this water from the Flint River was so corrosive that it took the coating off of pipes and took it down to the point where, you got the old lead coatings, from these old pipes.
Right.
And what happens over years, they get coated with phosphates and things like that, so they're not as harmful. But what happened was the lead levels started rising, and enough to where people noticed that their children were acting funny. And the worst thing is that people let the governor and others in the state know. And they've known, my understanding is they've known for a couple of years now. And it wasn't until the reports got really bad and damning that they finally did something. And of course, this stuff is irreversible now, and nobody wants to turn on their water because it's crap. They're afraid to even take a bath in that water. And nobody wants to turn on their faucets, and that's what they need to do to get the water flowing again, so these phosphates can cover the pipes and at least cover this poison, But that's the issue there. A lot of people in Michigan basically want to hang the governor.
Right.
Yeah, they want to have a tar and feather party, I think. And anywhere you go, it's the top dog is responsible for his underlings, right? And I don't know if you know the history here in Michigan, that we voted down the emergency manager law, and the governor shoved one back in immediately later. So a lot of us feel that he's entirely responsible for any problems that these emergency managers cause.
Yeah, and it seems like he skated right through it and pretty much weathered the storm now. And there's is there enough political opposition now to get the governor out?
There doesn't seem to be a movement, but again, I'm not, I don't have my finger on the pulse of a lot of this stuff because I refuse to watch television, to be honest with you. I think that it's, half the time I think it's a psyops, to be honest with you. And the other half, I just think it's depressing, and if something's really important, I hear it through my friends, I think he's a crook. I think a lot of people think the governor is a crook, but they're so insulated from things. I know there's been protests at his residence in Ann Arbor, but these people just seem to be able to wall themselves off from everything and everybody.
Yeah, I hear you. TV is very depressing, especially today. And we're playing this murder over and over and over again. Now, I heard a story one time. I never asked them directly, but that in Benton Harbor, because the water bills are insane all throughout the state of Michigan. They're just insane. People are paying like $300 a month for a water bill.
Yeah, not in Kalamazoo, fortunately. We've got it real good here.
No, you're lucky. Yeah. But I heard the story that Reverend Pinkney in Benton Harbor had the little tool that when people would get their water shut off, he had the little tool to go down there and turn their water back on. Did you ever hear that story?
I haven't. I haven't heard that story. I have not heard that one, and maybe he's kept it from me because he didn't want it to go into a book. I don't know. I feel that he's a pretty astute politically, and I would tend not to believe that story unless I heard it from a good source, But I'm not saying it's not true.
Yeah.
Okay. But at what I know about Reverend Pinkney, he's I don't know if he's that radical. He usually seems to operate within the boundaries of the law, okay. Which is what I find so infuriating about all this stuff. Is that he tries to obey the rules. He's trying to get political action done through the legal means, and then you get into court and you realize that these guys, they use these laws for whatever they want. It's not about justice and fairness and people getting a voice. That's bullcrap. They use it to manipulate, and they use it to keep their power. And that's all the courts are doing, in my opinion. So you're getting me on a rant now. I'm sorry. The more I think about it and talk about it, the more angry I get, to be honest.
I know. It happens to me every week, man.
Oh, my God. I don't know how you do it.
Sometimes it is just so, the burden is just so, overwhelming. When you just see the persistent injustice that just goes on, and so many people just asleep and just walk right through it like nothing's wrong, like nothing's happening.
Right. And a lot of people want to get mad at people, but a lot of us we're worked so hard, that it just takes so much time and energy just to get through life the way it's arranged these days, that people don't have time for activism.
Right.
They're too tired by the end of the day. But I think that it's kind of like, somebody whose spouse is cheating on them, and people keep saying, hey, I think they're cheating on you, and they just don't want to believe it. But one of these days, the American people are going to wake up and realize they've been cheated on, and there's going to be hell to pay. And at that time, I think a lot of politicians are going to claim that they're not a politician. There'll be some big changes. That's what I'm hoping anyway. I'm optimistic.
I hope so too. I hope there's a day they're all on the run, And like you said, the way things are constructed today is that every little task, every little menial task, you have to jump through so many hoops. I just bought and sold a car. I sold a car and I bought another car. And, I've sold and bought cars, 10 cars, 15 cars my whole life, but this time, the paperwork has just gone on forever. It's never ending. And smog tests and now they got your car rigged in a way that you can't even just go down and get a smog test. You got to drive at a certain amount of miles and these computers to reset. Right? Yeah, it's insane. So I'm driving around with no plates on the car, and I got to drive a certain amount of miles on the highway, a certain amount of miles. You have to stop at then they're telling me you got to stop at the red light, and wait there. It's just wait as long as you can without the cars behind you getting mad. They're telling me.
Oh, what the? No, is this a brand new car?
No, it's a 2006, man. I got it at the auction, but because when I got it, the battery was dead, so it reset all the computers. So it wasn't. You had to drive it to reset the things for the smog.
Oh, I see. But okay. I don't understand a lot of that stuff, to be honest.
It's just like everything was just so complicated. And now the DMV, when you go to DMV, it's a 4-hour wait when you go down there. And you have to have a cell phone, and they call you on your cell phone. If you don't have a cell phone, you're just out of luck. You're at the end of the line. It's just like, you're right. I think that a lot of these things they do nowadays is to keep us running on that little hamster wheel. So we're not raising our voices and going down in court watching and doing these recall petitions and all these brilliant things that our Reverend friend here has initiated.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Well, we're down to like the last 5 or 10 minutes. Is there anything left that I haven't asked you about that you want to bring forth about the Reverend Pinkney?
Well, it's just it's a grievous thing that a good man is in prison. Not just a good man, but one of the best. He's the type of person that if you and I were in prison and he knew about it, he'd be talking about it.
Right.
He'd be raising his voice. He'd be doing whatever he could. That's the type of person that he is. And if people help him to get out of prison, we'll be doing ourselves a favor, because he's such a fighter for everybody. And I think for me, this whole experience has really woke me up. And while he's going through his trials and his issues, what he's done for me is raised a tremendous awareness, and I'm going to say this crudely, but how crooked our judicial system is. It is turned upside down, in my opinion. And the worst sort of people are in those positions of authority. That's what I've found from my experience. A friend I was speaking to last night said it's corrupt from top to bottom. And from what I'm, starting to see, at the appellate level, they certainly didn't seem to want to hear any arguments, and they were quite fine with no evidence convicting someone and sending them off for years in a cage. And apparently the state Supreme Court as well, it's such obviously an injustice, and they talk over it, and they put different words in different order, and then it's okay apparently. But that's what I want to say is it's been a gift to me to open my eyes, and the Reverend Pinkney has put his whole body, his whole life on the chopping block for us to see, because he's such an admirable character. He's a reverend, for God's sake. He's,
right.
I know that's a bad thing for some people, but he's a true man of God. I mean, he puts his money where his mouth is, and he puts himself into his issues, and he's willing to back everything up with his own life. And to me, his life has been impeccable. I can't think of a braver, kinder man. That's a great combination in the first place. He's like a knight, And I've got such admiration for him to see the wheels of justice turned, upside down, backwards, in order to crush this man, to crush his voice, has just made me furious. I'm not a writer. I started this online newspaper years ago, wrote a few articles. This is my first book. I never would have written a book if I hadn't met, a man as admirable as Reverend Edward Pinkney. And I thank him for being in my life and showing me what a brave man is, what an awake, alive man is like. And if anybody wants that experience, make an effort to contact Reverend Pinkney, and I think you'll see what I mean.
Yeah, I totally agree. Or go back and listen to the old interviews we did with the Reverend. And you're right; he's an inspiring guy. And there's nothing like living your life in pursuit of justice for righting wrongs. And so this is somebody we need to look up to and respect and really give our support to in prayers and letters, cards, letters, and donations. bhbanco.org. Now, if you want, speaking of Philip A. Bassett, his book is Soldier of Truth, The Trials of Reverend Edward Pinkney. Again, you can find that at Amazon.com, and you can also find it on the Opperman Report bookstore. Mr. Bassett, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Ed.
And I'm going to send you an email with those links we were talking about off the air.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Well, there you have it. No matter what, I don't think 2 weeks go past that I don't tell someone about Reverend Pinkney in the street, or you see someone who I was online at the DMV. We were just talking about the DMV before, and they were registering people to a petition, and I said, I got a friend's in prison, for doing that. People kind of look at you like, there must be more to the story than what you're telling me, But that's just how it is. We're living in ridiculous times. Oh boy, what a miserable day too. We got the situation with Charlotte, North Carolina, where they're showing this homemade video of this woman watching her husband be gunned down by police, and then it's so obvious they planted the gun on this guy. It's just not even funny. I'll be talking about this in the after show tonight. Also, too, we'll be talking about a bunch of stuff. I got a whole bunch of notes for you, so don't worry about that. Also, a little bit distracted because I've been watching his snuff film all day long on this police murdering this guy. But then as well, right before I'm about to do this interview, you might recall the show we did about the child abduction story. And if you're not familiar with this story, this was initially a client. You know, we didn't talk about it during the show because for certain reasons we couldn't. But a child abduction case came to me, I believe it was Tennessee, Kentucky, something like that, and the kid was abducted by a convicted sex offender and taken from her home. Across state lines, one Walmart to another, back and forth. They're hiding in the woods, living off of, garbage and stuff. And finally, the child is rescued. And what do? They arrest the child because during this abduction, she stole her stepfather's truck in order to make leave with this convicted sex offender. So she gets thrown into a juvenile jail. And a lot of people know this story. They've heard this story. It's called a child abduction story. You can find it on Spreaker. You can find it on YouTube. And I just find out today that, to add insult to injury, now the mother is homeless in this case. And it just seems like I'm surrounded by tragedy everywhere I look. And so many people just struggling to get along and get through the system and just trying to keep their head above water and just been beaten down, one after another after another. So when you see someone like the good Reverend there, fighting the good fight for you and for me, and here he is now in prison right now tonight as you sit there and listen to the show, sipping your beer and sipping a nice glass of, wine, having your chicken wings, or whatever you're having, sitting back, cookies, brownies, smoking at 420. Everybody loves to smoke that stuff, right? All sitting back enjoying ourselves here, all nice and comfy. And here's someone who sacrificed his life for you and for me, and sitting there in a filthy hole on unjust charges.
What does it mean to live a moral life? When we talk about morality and when we talk about justice, we have to understand that there is no justice when so few have so much and so many have so little. There is no justice when the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Millions of people are working long hours for abysmally low wages, working hard, but unable to bring in enough money to adequately feed their kids. There is no justice when the United States of America has the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. How can we talk about morality, about justice, when we turn our backs on the children of our country? We have in this country sufficient amounts of money to put more people in jail than any other country on earth. But apparently, we do not have enough money to provide jobs and education to our young people. We are the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. All of God's children, the poor, the wretched, they have a right to go to a doctor when they are sick.
I want you to think of what this great country can be. We can be a nation which joins other nations around the world in guaranteeing health care to all people as a right. We can be a nation in which working parents can get quality, affordable child care. We can be a nation in which every American, regardless of his or her income, can get a college education. We can be a nation in which every senior lives out their lives in dignity and security. We can be a nation in where everyone, no matter their race, their religion, their disability, or their sexual orientation, realizes the full promise of equality that is our birthright as Americans. Brothers and sisters, this is the nation we can create when we stand together and not let people divide us.
The history of America and the fight for human dignity is a history of struggle. They struggled because they said, I am a human being. I have rights. You can't do that to me. I need dignity. And unions were formed, and people fought, and people died, and people were beaten, and people went to jail. When millions of people stand up and fight, they win.